Welcome to this edition of Weather to Watch on Thursday, the 30th of January, 2025. I'm meteorologist Ted Keller. The Pacific Northwest is going to go through some big changes, and we still have that big old low in the south producing rain and possibly some severe weather. Well, here's what I'm watching. Of course, that low pressure area in the upper atmosphere is still slowly moving across the south central U.S. It's going to pick up speed a little bit, but it's producing heavy rain, still ongoing. Some severe storms here this afternoon, and especially in Louisiana and areas nearby. There's a slight weather pattern change. Mostly the country's still seeing a warmer weather pattern, but there are some slivers of winter weather that are going to kind of ease their way into the northern plains, and that leads me to that snow possibility question mark of where the next big storm might occur, or where at least winter precipitation might start to return to the lower 48. Here's a look at the lower 48 as we transition to the visible satellite loop. Quite impressive storm there in the central U.S. Lots of moisture flowing up ahead of that upper level low. Been talking about this for days now, and here's where it's located on the actual weather map, centered over, well, it looks like just extreme southeast Colorado, right around Springfield, Colorado. And the circulation is always implied to be following these red lines to a pretty good approximation, so that's how it's moving along. A spreading of the air aloft is encouraging lift. You can see the brighter tops of some of these convective precipitation clouds, including what's going to be moving into this part of the world. I'll show you the severe weather analysis here in just a minute. Heavy rain stretching along this weather system, so from Dallas all the way up to Kentucky, we're looking at commonly either 1.5 to well over 2-inch, maybe even 3-inch totals in portions of Arkansas. Much of the rain has left that area, but it's still spreading up toward the northeast over the next couple of days and diminishing a little bit in intensity. And mostly the rain totals are not going to rack up as much because the actual storm itself is picking up speed. So the less time it's raining in one area, generally speaking, all else being equal, it's not going to dump as much rain. Now, severe weather is another thing. We're watching Louisiana in particular, but also portions of eastern Texas this afternoon for some severe weather potential. This is 2 out of the 5 here in this yellow area, with a more marginal risk in that green area outside of that. That goes as far north as Little Rock, and there are lines of storms developing here. And speaking of lines, I think straight line winds are probably the main threat with this, although some embedded tornadoes are not out of the question. Here's the tornado threat for that area. And when you see 2%, 5%, the way the Storm Prediction Center, SPC, does this is they give you a percentage risk of a certain event happening within a 25-mile radius of wherever you live. So pick your town, draw a circle 25 miles around it, and what that's saying is there's about a 5% chance of a tornado occurring in that circle. That doesn't seem real high, but actually that's starting to rank a little bit. In the worst severe weather outbreaks, though, that goes well above 30%, so it's pretty significant. So this isn't the biggest threat we have, but there is some cause for concern down there in Louisiana and East Texas. Here's a look on this Thursday afternoon of radar. An extensive rain shield extends from northern and northwestern, make that northeastern Arkansas, all the way over to Kentucky and Tennessee and up into Illinois as well. All that, by the way, is liquid. It's not cold enough for that to be any frozen precipitation. That's kind of a blessing here in the last couple of days of January. And if I go on down here and move this around a little bit, and this is also overlaid with storm reports. So all those little circles you see here have just been flooding reports so far. Not surprising since this just left that area. And also, if we go down here into Arkansas, we will see, and also Louisiana, some lines of storms beginning to develop. This is a severe weather potential area here for later on this afternoon. Weather watch is likely in that area. And on the back end of this, that's where the snow is occurring. And you can see some, if it's a blue indicator, then that's a snow report in that part of the world. So some pretty good snows right along the range of the Rockies here, but in a pretty limited extent, but pretty good snows nevertheless. Here's a review of the forecast for the 500 millibar flow, our old friend. It shows you the jet stream pattern, where storms are, where warm and cold air are located. And we'll start off today by looking at the feature of the week, which is this cutoff low right in here. Been talking extensively about that. We'll show you some of the results of that particular system as it moves out into the south central U.S. here over the next couple of days. We also have a couple of storms here off the northwest coast. We have this one and this one that are going to combine forces. And then, of course, the separation of the Arctic air from the warm air is right there. So most of the Arctic air, at least for the time being, is bottled up there in Canada. So is that going to stay the same? Well, let's watch and see what happens here. Let's advance this, and we'll go to, let's say, all right, let's go to Friday. Let's go to Friday evening, and that's about right there. And so this cutoff low gets absorbed into the main jet stream flow right here, still producing heavy rain. Talk a little bit about that in a second. And then there's a kind of a Pineapple Express. Here's Hawaii right here. So we have this flow of moisture coming in like this along this jet stream. And the storms of interest, there's one here, but it's going to be kind of lost because this one that's digging south off the coast of Western Canada is much more significant. So these two are going to combine forces, and I'll start advancing this a little bit more, and you'll see what happens here. This is Wednesday about midday right here, which is at the edge of where this becomes kind of a loss. I mean, it's fairly accurate a few days out, day 6, it's okay. But what we're generally seeing here is kind of a suppression of the jet stream. So colder air is going to be allowed to advance. I want you to notice that there's a stream right here of little disturbances, and one of those, if not both of those, and maybe they'll combine, will probably tap into this Arctic air. So I'm thinking over the northern plains, or maybe over the central plains, there might be our next snow event of worth noting. And you should also note that everything south of the jet stream down here in the south central and southeastern U.S. is going to be balmy, being on the warm side of the jet. Well, here's a visual of that storminess over the Pacific, and we're using the water vapor loop so we can identify dry air, of which there is plenty in California, as an example, and wrapping around this cutoff low here. There's another storm here, but as I was saying, this one down here is going to kind of lose some of its punch. This, combined with that one storm I was showing you on the forecast that's off this chart, bearing straight down along the western Canadian coast, is what's going to combine to produce some pretty good rains in the Pacific Northwest. As a fact, we take a look at the precipitation today through Saturday. You're looking at pretty good rains in areas just off to the west of Redding, California. Again, if you see the purple, it's 1.5 inches. If you see these reds, it gets into the 2.5, even 3-inch range in some areas. And this is also orographic lifting that's helping squeeze out a lot of rain. And not all of that is rain. As a matter of fact, the probability of a foot or more of snow from Thursday through Sunday is pretty high, 80% there in the northern part of Washington State along the mountain ranges there, and in some other mountain ranges through Idaho and extending down into California as well. Not as high of a probability of a foot or more, but if you reduce the amount, the probability of snow is pretty good. Well, the weekend is here, and if you see a red color, you're above normal for your high temperature forecast. So much of the central U.S., eastern U.S. is going to be enjoying a pretty balmy Saturday. Still cold in the northeastern U.S., and still lake effect snows there. New York, all of New England. And of course, with that weather system coming ashore in the northwest, you're going to be a little bit cooler as well. If we go ahead to Sunday, the warmth expands even more. Denver will get almost to 60 on Sunday, with temperatures in the 60s and 70s very commonly through this part of the world. And again, you can kind of see the inroads of that Arctic air, that colder air into the Pacific Northwest and even Montana. Meanwhile, here in Maine, cool, but getting a little bit better. And I'll do one more thing here on this particular type of forecast, and we were emphasizing how winter is kind of returning to the northern U.S., and you can kind of see that the below normal readings in green and blue are starting to really take a hold there, in particular in Montana. Some pretty good Arctic air forming there. And in fact, the 6 to 10 day forecast for temperature is encouraging the idea of cooler air in California, but in particular the Pacific Northwest and Montana. Still hanging on to winter there in Maine in general, but still a pretty warm weather pattern through this part of the world. And precipitation-wise, the last map, pretty good chance of enhanced precipitation here. And it's the extension of this idea this way is where I'm maybe thinking there might be some snow developing, but this would be well into next week before we even see that begin to happen. Well, that wraps it up for this edition. If you like this video and others like it, please like it on YouTube. Also, follow me if you get a chance to do that as well. We'll have other recordings like this every other day or so. We'll see you in the next video.